Good afternoon. Welcome to a French session on the legal process, really, about buying in France, from the role of the agent to the role of the notary and a lawyer, should you use one. So my name's Liz Rowlinson. I'm a property journalist. I do a lot for Place in the Sun and usually travel around a lot, maybe not now, but I've got two brilliant market experts to talk about the buying process. And if you've got any questions as we go along, there's a Q&A facility on the screen, so do ping us a question and we'll try and get to as many as we can at the towards the end of the session. And if not, we can explain about how you can book some one-to-one sessions with Barbara and Joe. So Barbara Heslop from Heslop and Platt. Tell us about what you do, Barbara. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I lost you there for a moment.
Sorry, Barbara. I was just saying, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everybody. Bonjour. My name is Barbara Heslop. I work for Heslop and Platt. We're part of Ashton's Legal, who are a full-service law firm, but from the office in Leeds, we trade as Heslop and Platt. So we're French law specialists, and all we do is help people who are buying in France or selling, or if someone dies or gets divorced. There's always a property involved in what we do. And the full team is bilingual, French and English. Some of the team are French nationals and they're fully fluent in English. And those of us like myself who are British, we're also fluent in French. So that's a big plus for us, because all our communications with the professionals in France can be done in French.
Perfect. And Joanna Leggett from Leggett Immobilia.
Hi everyone. Yes, we're a family business, Leggett Immobilia. We started 22 years ago, founded by my husband originally. We were originally a British agency, but now we're sort of 50-50 French, English, German, Dutch, lots of nationalities speaking. We're probably one of the biggest independent family-owned businesses in France. So we cover all areas of France, and we have about 600 agents that all live and work in France, so they can help you through the process because they know their areas and they know the properties, etc. We also have an in-house sort of contracts team, and we have an in-house call centre which can help plan itineraries and things like that. And we also have, obviously with us being bilingual, we do a lot of translation work as well for the clients. So we're here to help whichever way we can.
And Joe, how an agent can really help your purchase is where we're going to kick off, because you said obviously yes, you're an English company that's expanded, but why is it so much more helpful to actually, if you're a British buyer, deal with perhaps an English company that's used to dealing with English buyers, rather than a local agent whose English perhaps might not be fluent?
Well, it really depends. I mean, times have changed, obviously, but I remember when I bought sort of 15, 20 years, going up for 20 years ago, I went to the estate agent who was French. My level of French was terrible, and it was 5 to 12, and they closed and said, sorry, come back at 2 o'clock. So there is quite a big difference with the cultures. I mean, things have changed now, and the French agents are a lot better, of course, but there is always the language barrier. And there's also a lot of introductory agents in the UK that will send you out to French estate agents, but they don't actually know the property or don't live and work in the area. And I think the most important thing is a lot of our British agents that work with us have all made the move. We've all been in the UK. We've gone through every possibility that could have happened, through a sale, good or bad, ups and downs. So we can give advice from having done it ourselves, I think. And that's not just for Brits. I mean, we have a lot of French that might move from Paris to the countryside, etc. So, like if I was moving to Yorkshire, I wouldn't know Yorkshire. So it's the same with the French. So we can give a lot of advice because we've got a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge within the company, which is good.
Yeah, no, local knowledge is absolutely key, as you point up. And basically, you do a lot of hand holding for British buyers, don't you? Because I mean, sometimes buyers will come to you at one of our exhibitions and say, we're not even sure where we want to buy, and then you have that first conversation, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. Well, I mean, unfortunately, obviously with COVID, we can't be on the stand today as we would normally be, but we usually have a selection of agents from different areas. So you can come along and chat to each one. I mean, whoever you speak to will tell you that their area is the best because that's why they live there and that's why, you know, they're happy and have bought their homes there. I mean, I travel the whole of France and there's different areas for different people. And it really depends what you want from your area. But the good thing is because we do cover the whole of France, we've got great experience, so we can listen to what the needs are of the client and then sort of match to budget, area, location, if you need to be near hospitals, weather, because the climate, with France being so big, the climate changes drastically from north to south and also in the middle. So we can advise on the best locations that would suit. And then my advice would be to do some recce trips, you know, to go over there if you haven't been to the area before and spend some time there on a holiday. And I would also suggest that you try and do that in the winter months, because if you're going to be living there permanently, you want to make sure that you have some sort of life in the winter, not just in the summer, when everywhere in France is beautiful, of course.
Yes, well, let's hope things have eased up by the winter. And by the way, on locations, we're going to probably be doing another webinar session on the different the benefits and pluses of different locations in the next couple of weeks. So do look out for that one. But Barbara, the purchase process in France is different from the UK, and it's a notarial system where which the British might not be so familiar with. Can you just explain, what does the notary do in the process, and why might buyers actually want to employ their own lawyer as well?
Okay, so I mean, in the UK there are two main legal professions, the solicitor and the barrister. Okay, so in France you have the notary, the notaire, and you have an avocat. So an avocat looks after disputes and goes to court and so on. So the notaire, the notary, is the professional that you will come into contact with if you're buying a property in France. And the notaires have a monopoly on anything that changes ownership of a French property. So it has to go through a notaire in France. Okay, that's not optional. Mm-hmm. The notaire is a public officer appointed by the French Ministry of Justice. Okay, it's often said that the notaire is a civil servant, but in fact they're what's called liberal professionals. So they run their own practices. Okay, and they get paid by the clients. They don't get paid by the state, but they also have to collect the tax. But that's no different to a solicitor in England on a conveyancing transaction. The solicitor in England has to collect the stamp duty and pay it over to HMRC. So it's no different really. So the notaire, think of the notaire for a property transaction as the solicitor doing the conveyancing in the UK. Okay, you can, when you're buying, there can be just one notaire who will basically represent both parties, and the notaire is supposed to be impartial. Okay, the notaire is usually chosen by the seller, and so often, because our British clients are used to having their own solicitor, they will sometimes say, well, should we not have our own notaire? And the answer to that really is it's perfectly possible. So you can name your own notaire so that there are two notaires dealing with the transaction. And that won't cost any more because you, the buyer, will pay the notaire's fees, whether there's one notaire or two, okay? But in my experience, most of the time, and for most transactions, it's perfectly fine just to have one notaire. And the notaire is then supposed to be impartial and deal with both you and the seller on an even-handed basis, okay? The times when we recommend the appointment of a second notaire are really if it's a very high-value transaction or if there's some element of complexity, okay? But most of the time, it will be fine just to have one notaire. And so the notaire will then is responsible for giving effect to the agreement that the parties have reached. Yeah. Sometimes they will start the process in terms of drawing up the contract, and then they'll do the final deed. But as Joanna may explain shortly, in many cases when you're buying, it's actually the estate agent who draws up the first contract The notaire is not involved at that stage. So it varies from property to property as to when the notaire will become involved. And so to a certain extent, that's where the role of a UK-based or solicitor such as myself comes into play, because the biggest obstacle for most of our clients is the language, and the documentation can be quite lengthy and in French. And so, you know, it's really a case of, for peace of mind, to have someone who knows what they're doing looking over it and explaining it to you in English. And that's really where we come in, and that's what we do.
Brilliant, thank you. And to sort of hand over to Joe, yeah, you mentioned about the fact that Barbara mentioned how estate agents will often draw up the contract. So Joe, can you just briefly give a snapshot of the different things that the agent does during the process? So you going on from the conversation, either virtually or at one of our shows about, which location. So what after that, you see some properties. What does the agent do after that?
Well, it really depends. I mean, it really depends on the agency as well. You know, as Barbara said, a lot of agencies vary, and not all agencies draw. You know, we have an in-house contracts team, so we do the conveyancing, etc. And I would always say that, you know, if you're buying privately, you know, use services like Barbara offers, because you obviously don't have the agent that does that. So a good agency will do everything from start to finish. So we will obviously show the properties. Every property viewing is accompanied. We don't let people go on their own. Obviously with COVID, we've got a few restrictions, but obviously we still do the viewings with the clients. Then when the offer has been put in, we will negotiate with both the buyer and the seller. Once that offer has been accepted, then we start drawing up the diagnostics. That's not a survey. In England, they'd have a survey. In France, they don't really do surveys. British people prefer to have surveys, so they can get those done. But you can't make a sale subject to survey in France like they do in the UK. You'd need to get your survey done first and then put in your offer, because it's much more negotiable once once before than after. So say that everything's in place, the agent would then get the diagnostics reports ordered, which the vendor has to pay for, not the buyer. That would include sort of the drainage. You need a FOSS report to show whether the septic tank is up to European standards or not. If it's not, you have to, and a lot of them won't be, because the laws changed a few years ago and the septic tanks may have been in for 10, 15 years. You need to sign at the notaires when you go to sign the final act to say that you know it doesn't conform, and you will make it conform within 18 months. If you're with your agent and they tell you it doesn't conform and that's included in the price, that's fine. If your agent tells you it does conform and then it doesn't when the report comes back, then you have some room for negotiation, because, you know, septic tanks can be quite expensive, particularly if the land is rock and they've got to dig into the rock. So that's one of the reports. You'd also have lead. Lead is just to make you aware if, for example, there's lead paint in shutters, for example, so that you wear a mask if you're stripping them, etc. It's not a reason to pull out from the sale or renegotiate on the price. The same with asbestos. A lot of old farm buildings will have asbestos on the roofs. Again, it's just to make you aware of where they are, and if you want to dispose of them, you have to abide by the rules of, you know, where you put asbestos. Then you'll have termites. Termites is another test. You really don't get that much anymore, termites. They can be treated, but the termite test has to be valid within 3 months of having the test done. So if the sale went on and on, it would have to be done again. Termites is a reason that you can pull out from the sale. If the house has termites, that is a reason that you can pull out. It will also show you woodworm, etc., which again, you may need some quotes in to find out how much that's going to be treated. There'll be an electric test to check the electrics. The electrics do vary from the UK, and you will have a full report on that to show you what needs to be done or what doesn't need to be done. I think that I mentioned all of them, I think so. So all of those tests are done, and then they are sent out with the compromis de vente. The compromis de vente is like an exchange of contracts. As Barbara says, usually for us as an agency, we have an in-house contracts team that would do this. We would also send a translated version for British speakers if they don't speak French, which most of us or most of the British probably won't. so that you can see exactly what you're signing. That goes out to the buyer first, so the buyer signs first, and the buyer will have 10 days cooling off period, and then it's sent to the vendor. The buyer's 10-day cooling off period doesn't start until the fully signed compromise goes back to the buyer, and then the 10 days cooling off period starts from the day that you receive that recorded delivery, or if you're signing in front of a notary or a solicitor as such. Then after that process, then all the searches are then made. So as for us as an agency, or if you were working with Barbara, for example, Barbara would be working with the notaire, or us as an agency, or we actually work with Barbara as well, would be all working together between the, between the contracts, the sign of the contracts to the completion. So all the searches are made during that time as well. And for us as an agency, we can be doing other things. I mean, we've got set up appointments with the Mary to meet the children if we're trying to get children into schools, etc. We can be getting builders quotes if they want renovation work. We apply for CUs for clients if they want change of use from a barn to habitation as such. So all of that sort of work, wouldn't be a normal job of an estate agent in the UK. I mean, you would never hear of an estate agent going to see the mayor to get children into school, for example, or introducing to the doctors, or setting up the bank accounts. We do all of that sort of thing as well. It's a proper hand-holding service. We would sort out insurance quotes, etc., for house insurance. So we'd be putting the clients in touch with everybody that they need to do between exchange of contracts to completion, and also our contracts team would be working alongside either your British solicitor like Barbara, or again with the notaire at the same time. And then obviously when it comes to the final act, we would take the client to see the property before they sign, make sure everything's in place. We take meter readings because we do the changeover as an agency for the electrics and water. We're not allowed to do the telephone anymore, unfortunately, but we can put you in touch with telephone companies. But we do the meter readings, and we do change over the names into the new buyers' names for that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jo. Barbara, I mean, how much does if someone's kind of just setting out to buy a property in France, on top of the sales price, how much should they budget for, closing or purchase costs, and then legal fees if they decide to employ a lawyer on top of the, the notaire, as you've already explained?
Okay, so as a ballpark, buyers in France need to budget for between 7 and 8% on top of the purchase price for the notaire's fees, okay? Now, that sounds a lot, but actually just under 6% of that is the tax. So like the stamp duty that we pay in the UK. So 7 to 8%, of which 6% approximately is the tax, okay? And that is payable to the notaire's account in time for completion of the purchase. If you're buying off plan, a new build, then the fees and the tax are less. But for an existing built property, then that's what you need to be budgeting for, okay? If you're buying with the assistance of a French mortgage, then there will be additional notaire's fees, because the notaire will also be acting for the bank to register the mortgage against the title to the property, and so you need to perhaps budget for an extra 0.5% to 1% of the cost of the loan. Okay, so that hopefully that gives you an indication in terms of the fees of a firm like Heslop and Platt. Our minimum fee for helping with a purchase is currently £3,000 plus French VAT. Okay, which is the same as UK VAT, 20%. So that's our minimum fee. We do give an estimate of our fee at the outset, and very transparent in terms of what it's going to cost. But obviously, if something becomes very complex or is very high value, then the fees can be higher. And that is separate, so it is an additional cost to use us. But all the clients that we work for say at the end of it, they couldn't have managed without us. So it's certainly worth building that into your budget, because it will definitely give you peace of mind.
Yeah, and it's actually it's more affordable than some other countries buying a property in France. So that's a point to bear in mind in terms of purchase costs. We've got a question, Joe. I think we were just talking about exchange of contracts. Ian Truman asks, how long typically between exchange of contracts to completion?
Well, typically it would be 3 months, but it really depends on the property, if there's a lot of people involved, etc. But I would say a minimum of 3 months. It could be 3 to 4 months between exchange to completion, generally speaking. I mean, we have turned around sales in 6 weeks, but that's very rare. So I would generally say between sort of 3 and 4 months for completion.
Yeah, so we are going to go into more detail later on the whole relocation subject. But in just you brought up the the Brexit subject. I mean, Joe, I mean, in theory, there's still time to buy a property in France, isn't there, and get settled before the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think it has been a little bit of a panic that, you need to buy your property before October, because obviously it does take 3 months to complete to be in your property by December. However, you don't have to own a property to be a resident in France. You can move over and spend more time looking for a property and rent somewhere. As long as you register yourself as living permanently in France before December the 31st, then you will be a resident in France, and you'll be entitled to all the sort of things that residents are at the moment. And that also gives us till June to apply for the carte séjour, which is the permit to live in France as such. And it will be slightly easier for those that are already in by the 31st of December. But don't rush into buying something because you really don't need to. You can rent until you buy, as long as you do declare yourself as a fiscal tax resident in France.
Brilliant. I'm glad you raised that subject of renting, because of the first question we actually got was, if you're renting looking to apply for residency, what documents do you need? And do you also need copies in French?
Everything would need to be in French without a doubt. Sorry, I don't know if you were going to ask me that or Barbara, but you would need an official translation of your documents to be in French. We're still not sure what documents they're going to ask us for, but previously, when we had to apply for carte séjours before Europe, you would just need to prove your income, which at that stage was €10,000 a year. We're thinking it's probably going to be around 15,000 per year for a couple. So you would need to show that you can afford to keep yourself living in France. And then generally speaking, it's your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, divorce certificate. Everything would have to be officially translated by an official French translator, and you would just give those documents in. And it costs around €60 to get a document translated by an official translator.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Well, as I said, that'll be covered in a bit more detail in the subject, the session on relocation later today. Barbara, when you do the checks, if you're sort of looking after the buyer and making sure on their behalf that there's no horrors in the closet, as it were, what are the typical checks that you do for them in terms of a property they like the look of?
So obviously every property is different, and so when we're helping clients, we get them to fill in a property questionnaire, so we understand a little bit more about the property. We look at the agency brochure, the advert, we get photos of the property from the client, so that we've got a real feel for this property that they're buying.
I think we might have just lost Barbara's Wi-Fi. While we're doing that, Joe, a quick question for you.
Yeah.
How much would it cost for legate services? Well, a buyer, you're not going to pay anything, are you?
No, there is no. The services are we obviously, well, it depends on the mandate, because some of the mandates will be the buyer pays the fees, and some of the mandates will be the vendor pays the fees. It really makes no difference whatsoever on the price, because it will either be included in the price or the buyer pays the fees. It makes a slight difference on the notary fees, because the notary fees are based on the total cost. So if the buyer is paying the fees, and that cost has come off, so the notary fees might be slightly less. But really, that's that they don't pay for the estate agents' fees. Well, they will be paying those, but that's all. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Barbara. We just covered something while we lost you.
You lost me for a moment. Yes, I was saying that we deal with a lot of planning issues. So we look to see whether any extension or conversion or the putting in a pool, to make sure that's all been authorised. And quite often we find that perhaps it hasn't been. So we look at how that can be regularised for our clients, because they don't want to buy a property that's got a planning breach. We also talk about the client's plans for the property, and if they want to extend it or put a pool in or whatever, then we'll explain what needs to be done to make sure that they're sure that they can do that work once they become owners. And that involves putting in an extra condition into the purchase contract, so that if they don't get the authorization as part of the buying process to do that work, then they can pull out. So planning is a big issue. We look at rights of way. We investigate why the sellers are selling. We check with the mairie to make sure there aren't going to be wind turbines put up that's going to spoil the view. So we're basically looking at a whole host of things to make sure there'll be no unwelcome surprises once you pick up the keys.
Yes, and funny enough, talking of unwelcome surprises, another question that just came up in the session before about termites. And Joe, you've already mentioned them, but there is a sort of north-south divide, isn't there, of where you find them in properties?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I'm based in the Dordogne. I personally live in the Dordogne, but there used to be, areas of the Dordogne that were quite prone to them. But to be honest, that was probably maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's very, very rare that we see termites these days. We had a chateau for sale recently, a very old medieval chateau, and termites did show up in that particular property. But experts were called out, the property was treated, it was checked again 3 months down the line, completely gone. So it's not a huge issue unless they've practically eaten the house, which they can do if not treated. But yeah, you don't see so much of it these days as we did in the past, because obviously people do realise they have termites, or they do get experts out. However, if the property's been empty for some time, then obviously you can see them. But I wouldn't say it's area specific by area. I would say that you can get them anywhere, but it's very rare these days that we do.
Okay, and Barbara alluded to the fact that you find out the history of the property in terms of how long it's maybe been on the market, etc. I mean, would give you scope to negotiate on the I mean, at the moment, I mean, how much should are buyers sort of making cheeky offers because they think perhaps that the market in France is suffering? What's the situation, Joe?
Absolutely not. The market, we've had our busiest month in July in 22 years for sales. So the market in France itself, the domestic market, is massively strong. It's been the highest it's been in sort of 3 years anyway, despite lockdown. And where we've seen properties being on the market for a year to 2 years sometimes are selling within 6 months. So it's definitely not the time to be putting in cheeky offers, because there does seem to be more than one person per property, whereas in the past you might have one buyer and you would easily get away with that. Mortgage rates are really low in France at the moment. You can buy fixed for term at sort of 1.2%, which is really pushing the French domestic market. And also with the fact of lockdown, it's encouraged people that have been buying in cities to buy rural countryside properties, or properties where they can work from home, or good internet signal, etc. And companies are realizing that actually people can work from home and they don't need to rent so much office space. So that's completely changed the market. And where us Brits tend to go for the sort of countryside or ski locations, etc., is where everybody's now looking. So obviously the market has completely changed. So those days are sort of not there anymore, where you can put in a really low offer and expect to get it accepted, because there may be one or two or three people even looking at the same property. So I would always suggest that if you are going out to France and you are looking to buy, make sure you're in a proper position. You've either sold in the UK or you've got your finance in place to be able to purchase, because it can be really disappointing if you find your dream home but you can't buy and somebody else can, and because the market is very strong at the moment.
Can I just add to that,
Yes.
Liz, please, and Joe? As Joanna says, you know, you're going to be in the best position if you are a cash buyer, and we get a lot of people coming to us who still have their UK property to sell, and however tempting it is to make an offer on a property, when you still have to sell your UK property, it becomes really stressful for all parties. So you know, really, you're going to be best if you can complete the sale of the UK property and then go to France as a cash buyer. And if you're trying to get into France before the end of the year, then the answer is, as we've said, to rent and then put off buying until you know, later on, because you'll have much more leverage as a cash buyer than trying to make the French purchase contract conditional on a UK sale. It can be done, but it ends up being fairly stressful for all concerned.
Yeah, I think, as Joe says, I think perhaps the French market in parts is more lively than the UK, and people you know, can't always sell their UK home straight away. On the subject of mortgages, if for either of you, Suzanne Crawford asks, if you have a European passport, are mortgage fees and deals cheaper, or doesn't it matter?
It makes no difference whatsoever. No, I, as far as I'm aware, I think there was a mortgage session this morning, but yeah, it doesn't really make any difference. You're applying for a mortgage, and which, depending on which bank it is, depends on what the fee you'll be paying is, but it shouldn't make any difference to any nationality.
Okay, and I think a question from Susanna Ianardes, I think just earlier, Joe, you said that notaires' costs can vary by region. Is that right? Slightly. I mean, Barbara might be able to answer that more so. I mean, I do notice there's slightly, maybe 0.5% or 1% more. If you're getting a mortgage, it's slightly more expensive because they have to do slightly more work. But yeah, it really depends. But the notaires, if you go on the Notaires de France website, they give you all the fees for every single area that you can buy in. So you will be able to see, and it's very, very slight, the differences between areas.
And the important thing there is that the notaires fees are non-negotiable. So you know, if you go to a notaire in the neighbouring commune, you know, it's going to be pretty much the same. So they're not negotiable.
Okay, and I know Joe's already said that Leggett have their own sort of conveyancing department, but would estate agents advise on which notaire to use? Asks Susanna again.
We would normally always suggest that you use the notaire that has the deeds to the property.
Right.
The reason being is that it will probably be the local notaire in the village. They will know all about the village. They'll know everybody in the village. They'll know what plans are being built in the village or etc. or the town. They'll probably have dealt with that same property over generations of people. So they'll have every single detail of that property in-house. Now, there are certain notaires that might be dealing with the property, say, for example, for a Parisian family that might have a home office and they deal with lots of properties, then they might use a Parisian notaire. In that aspect, I would suggest that rather than using the Parisian notaire, you would find the local notaire that is in the village of where the property is situated, or the town where the property is situated, and use them as the second notaire. You don't pay double fees. The notaire's fees are split, as Barbara said before, they're non-negotiable. 80% of that money goes to the government anyway, and only 20% if it goes to the notaire themselves. But it's always best to get the local notaire, and they don't work for the buyer or the seller. They are completely neutral. They're just basically government tax collectors, and they deal with property all the time. And it's always best to get the one, because you can then, you know, work with them on other things that you may need to do locally, whether it's a French will or things like that. You could work with your local notaire for that as well.
Brilliant. And we have a question which I'm pretty much, I think, going to be able to answer myself on this one. Will it be difficult to buy a holiday home after December the 31st? And the answer is no, it won't, will it, Jo?
No, not at all. I mean, we sell to Americans, South Africans, all other nationalities now, you know, and France is such a popular destination. You know, it's loved by people all around the world. And for holiday homes, anybody can buy a holiday home in France. Brexit won't affect that at all. The only thing it might affect is the amount of time you can spend in it. Whereas at the moment, we're completely free. We could space 6 months here, 6 months in the UK, if the UK is your fiscal residence. That may change. So you might only be able to spend 3 months at a time in France without having to apply to come back again. So that will be the only difference, I think. But we still don't know, because we still don't know what the deal is with Brexit. But that, I think, will be the only difference, is the amount of time that you can spend in the holiday home.
Yeah,
I think it needs to be fairly clear, actually, that you know, from January the 1st next year, British nationals who own a second home in France will be subject.
Oh, we lost her at a crucial point.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jo, you sort of answered the next question, actually, about the fact that yes, we actually don't know whether we're going to be able to spend 3 months in France next year and or longer. So that really answers Vivian Morris's question there. Sorry, Barbara, we lost you a sec.
Yeah, I was just really saying that, you know, the rule from January is going to be that you can't spend more than 90 days every 180 days,
right,
you know, in a second home. So
okay, a quick question for you again, Barbara. Is there a system in place to ensure any previous works to a property are legal and to a standard? A brief answer, if you can.
no, it needs investigating.
Right.
Don't assume that the notaire will pick it up, because the notaire may not ask, you know, be aware of things. So it's something that you've got to flag up if you're concerned about it.
Okay. And on the subject of doing your sort of research and due diligence, Jo, someone writes, I've heard that there's a wind farm project in the pipeline, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to confirm that, but can he ask the local Mary to provide written confirmation of things like this being built?
Yes, of course you can, and I would always suggest you do that. I mean, we've got a wind farm being built near us, and to be honest, there's plans for over 100,000 wind farms to be built all over France in the forthcoming years. It's just something that we're going to have to get used to, and it will be something that you are going to see all across France, like you do in Spain, you know, at the moment. So, but yes, you can, if you feel like you're going to be affected or you don't want to be part of it or whatever, you can go to your local mairie, and they can provide you plans, because they'll have the plans of where new developments are going to be, where there's building permission for new developments to be put up. But that is also part of the notaire's role, that they should be checking if there's going to be anything built in the vicinity that will affect the price of a property, not just wind farms. It could be a motorway, it could be a petrol station, it could be anything. But all of those things the notaire's should check. But you can go, and I would always recommend go and introduce yourself to the mayor if you're buying a property in France anyway. It's always a good thing. And you can ask to see the plan de sol, which is the plan for the whole of the community. It will show you where building plots are, it will show you what's going on, and you can have a chat with them and they'll be happy to tell you.
Brilliant. Right, we're running out of time. Just a quick question of if you're a cash buyer, and do you need to provide evidence that you have your cash in your finance in place? Do you have to have money in a French bank account?
No, you don't. No, the money can still be in the UK. Obviously, you just have to buy your euros and transfer your funds to the notaire in time for completion, or initially to pay the 5 or 10% deposit, which is payable once the contract has been signed. But no, generally you're not asked to provide evidence to the notaire.
Brilliant. Well, that's a very good segue into our next session, is going to be about currency exchange. So we can talk about that, but we've actually just run out of time on this session. So I know we'll be seeing you guys a bit later at 4 o'clock to have another chat. So if you want to sort of tune in for that, if you're not interested in the next currency session. But Barb, you can also book sessions with Barbara or Joe or members of her team for individual Zoom sessions. So if you go to our exhibitor page, you can book a slot, and just it's an ideal opportunity to have a chat virtually, a Zoom session. So I think we've got to go. So I'm really sorry that we've nearly got through all the questions, but thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Joe, and we'll see you later. Okay, see you at 4.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye-bye.